Well, hello, folks, and welcome to the Dieter Melhorn Fishing Podcast. I hope you're having a good day, whatever day it is that you happen to be listening to the show. Today, we're going to talk about the walleye fishermen that were caught cheating. If you're not familiar, there was a cheating scandal that happened in a walleye fishing tournament. I'm not a walleye fisherman. I would love to do it at some point, but it's kind of a upper Midwest, Lake Erie, Great Lakes area kind of thing. We don't have them. I think there are some here in the South in a couple of reservoirs that they were stocked into, but not a lot. But in this tournament, these tournaments are a big deal. There's a lot of money in these things, a lot of money riding on them. It's very big. It's as big a local thing. I say local, it's regional. As catfish tournaments are here in the South, or crappie fishing tournament. So big money in these things. Two guys were caught stuffing weights, lead weights, into the stomachs of these fish that they were weighing in. Now, it had been alleged by local anglers that this had been going on for a while, but they had never been criminally charged. There were some things that happened with some lie detector, polygraph test, voice stress analysis that was questionable, but no charges were ever brought in any of these cases. Finally, during one of these tournaments, they were weighing in fish that were physically about the same size in length as the other fish that were being weighed in. The problem was the weight was significantly more for each fish. And anybody that's fished a tournament, whether it be bass, crappie, catfish, anything out there, if you've done it enough and you've fished enough, most anglers can look at a fish and go, that fish is pretty close. And when you get into reservoirs, this really comes into play when you start talking about bass fishing and crappie fishing, to where you have fish that are in a very narrow length range. Maybe it's bass and they're 16 to 18 inches where you're fishing, and there's a lot of them. Or, it's crappie and they're 12 to 14 inches. Most of the guys that are experienced are very good at looking at those fish and going, oh, that fish weighs 2 pounds. That fish weighs 2 pounds. He's 2, maybe 2.4. And the same thing in the walleye world. These guys know pretty much that these fish, whatever length they are that are being caught, are a certain, weight. It's one thing when you get one that, let's say they're catching them all 26 inches and then you have one that's 30. Okay, that's a significantly larger fish. It's going to be a different weight. What happened was they were looking at these fish and they were going, wow, they're weighing 1.5 pounds more than a fish of a similar size. They weighed their fish in, they entered them. Tournament owner or tournament director comes over, takes a knife, cuts open the bellies of one of the fish, and boom, there are lead weights, fishing weights inside of these fish, along with some fish fillets, which were fillets off of other walleye. At this point, he cuts open another fish, finds the same thing. This is all over the internet. There's videos of it everywhere. It's going viral. I mean, it's been seen millions of times. This made the evening news. As a matter of fact, the copy I've got from what happened here Monday is from CBS Evening News. So this is something that got not only nationwide news attention, but worldwide news attention. This stuff was being seen and shown all over the world. So pretty big deal. So what ends up happening is these guys are in court on Monday. They were charged late last year with several felonies and misdemeanors for some of the things going on. Now, it's important to say that this only relates to this one tournament. None of the other times, past tournaments where they won, and they won a lot of tournaments, they won a lot of stuff, they won a lot of money. None of these charges pertain to any of that. It pertains to this one event. And I'm going to read this from the CBS Evening News report on this, and it says, the two men accused of stuffing fish with lead weights and fish fillets in an attempt to win thousands of dollars in Ohio were pleaded guilty Monday to charges including cheating. They showed up in court. They entered their plea. They pleaded guilty. The two guys, Jacob Runyon and Chase Kaminsky, they're both, one is from Ohio, one is from Pennsylvania. They were the two guys that were involved in it. This came from back in September, like I said, and it's finally made its way to court. Now it says, as part of the plea deal, Runyon and Kaminsky pleaded guilty to cheating and unlawful ownership of wild animals, and agreed to a 3-year suspension of their fishing license. This was the plea that was entered, And this is a negotiation. If you don't know, there's always a negotiation in these deals between the prosecutor and the defendants to come to some type of an agreement, so to speak, to settle this without going to trial. One, the state doesn't want to tie up the time and money into an expensive trial over some fish and wildlife charges, and the men don't want to take the gamble on getting much more serious convictions with some of these felonies. So part of this agreement also involved Kaminsky giving up a bass boat that he had won that was worth $100,000. Now, what's interesting about this is, my understanding is, this is not tied to this tournament at all. But it is tied to some of the tournaments where there were questions and allegations about cheating. So it's interesting that he gave up this boat, and I think this may have been some things to avoid digging deeper into this. Now, both men are scheduled to be sentenced May 11th. The sentence has not been handed down. This is just, at this point, it's legal wranglings, offering some stuff up, and we're going to see what the judge does on May 11th. It says in this CBS News report, prosecutors plan to recommend a sentence of 6 months probation and later ask for expungement of their convictions if they successfully complete probation. That's interesting that they're asking for an expungement of all this. This has obviously made the fishing social media world already, and the reaction is very, very negative in that it's a very light sentence. And it's interesting that outside of giving up the boat, which is basically nothing out of their pocket, there is no monetary fine, compensatory fine, restitution, or anything else mentioned in this. Now, with that said, it's going to be up to the judge to decide what the sentence is going to be. And some of that stuff could be added in once they are actually sentenced in all this deal. It goes on to say here, the plea is Kaminsky's first step toward moving on with his life and taking full responsibility. The guy, his face is plastered all over the place, and I don't know what impact that had on his, his life and where he's at and everything, but it was probably pretty significant. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the loss of fishing license. That is something that generally does not extend outside of the state that you're in, the outside of the state of where this sentence is imposed. So it'll be interesting what plays out with that. It'll be interesting to see if it's only 3 years too. That's the thing with some of these wildlife violations. While it really infuriates and pisses off those of us who abide by the laws and do what we're supposed to, and try to do what's right, it makes us mad when somebody like this gets convicted. We expect more to happen to them. But the fact of the matter is, most of these sentences are based on sentencing guidelines, and these are things that are in place. A judge or jury just doesn't have they can't execute somebody for doing this. They can't put them in prison for 10 years for doing something like this. There are guidelines in place that kind of outline and dictate what should happen here. So they're operating within those parameters and controls of what they got to do there. The other thing people have brought up is, well, they cheated in other tournaments. Well, we don't know that. Is it likely? Quite possibly. There are a lot of people who have very strong feelings about that. I wasn't there. I don't know. I don't know what happened in any of these other ones, but there's a lot of people with a lot of strong feelings and convictions and believe that they should have been charged in some of these other ones. The cold hard truth is, it would be virtually impossible to get a conviction or anything else in something that happened 2 years ago, year before that, without any proof like they had in this situation. This was the time when it all came to a head and they cut those fish open and they found weights in them. Had they done that in these other tournaments, you might have something, but it's hard to go back and convict anybody or punish anybody or sentence anybody for anything that may or may not have happened. The bottom line is that, it's good that they finally got him. And I commend the tournament director for actually, stepping up and taking that risk on cutting those fish open, because it's almost, it's a gamble. You cut those fish open, there's nothing in them. You're probably never going to do that again. You kind of did your thing, and and I don't know, it was a gamble. Probably felt them, knew something was up, but I'm glad it was done. I'm glad it happened, and we'll see what happens in May when they're sentenced. Nobody's in jail. They're all out on bond and going about their normal lives and that kind of thing. So we've talked about this before. It's, cheating has happened before in fishing tournaments. It will happen again in fishing tournaments. There are people who feel that, most of the time, the people who are cheating don't need the money. That's the amazing part. While there's significant money involved here, for most people who have cheated, it's an ego thing. It's about, being the man, getting some recognition, being on top, being, accepted, held in high esteem. It's a lot of ego. And that's where most of the places where people cheat, that's most of the reason that people get into this and get into cheating. Personally, I think the vast majority of fishermen out there are honest and would not cheat. That their dignity, how they feel when they're done at the end of the day, is far more important than the recognition they get in what looks like a win. So. But with that said, it will happen. It happens again. Sometimes it's very, it's very flagrant, and sometimes it's subtle. I'll give you some examples. One of our local tournaments here in the Carolinas had an issue with people busting through no wake zones. Not a horribly big deal. It is a, it is a violation. It is a ticketable offense. Does it create an advantage? Yes, to a certain extent it does, because if somebody speeds through a wake zone, somebody behind them doesn't, that person is getting an advantage and getting to a place. Say there's a super secret great spot. Say you're fishing a small reservoir that fishes very small. There's only a few good areas. It does give you an advantage of getting somewhere first. There are other things that people are disqualified in tournaments that don't really give you a competitive advantage. You may have just screwed up. Something may have went wrong. Let's say your lights go out on the boat, and you're basically operating a boat illegally. Then if you're running at night, you could be disqualified for that in a tournament. There's other little things, but they don't really give you a competitive advantage. Sometimes that stuff happens. In this situation, this is obviously they were cheating. They were putting those weights in there, and they were doing it on purpose. It's interesting how somebody gets to that point that they want to do that, but it's human nature. So, and like I said, it will happen again. It'll happen at all levels of fishing. I believe some places it is harder to do that. It's one of the reasons I'm a big proponent of catch, photograph, video, live release type tournaments, to where you have to catch these fish on camera live. And, it's not so much about the weight. Maybe it's the total number of fish, total length of all the fish. Something like that makes it a lot harder to cheat. Sure, it can still be done. But as far as being able to catch fish in advance that are bigger, put them in a tank, bring them to weigh in, that type thing, it's a lot harder to pull off. So hopefully, in the end, it makes people a little more just, aware that this kind of stuff can happen. They'll be a little more on the lookout for it. They'll keep an eye out. There's always going to be some people that are going to be accused of it just because they're good. And, we've seen that before. You will get somebody that wins, is on a winning streak, and the first thing you're going to hear out of people is they're cheating. And it may or may not be true. But eventually, there's some people out there that are going to do it. And I think they stick out, to be perfectly honest. The people who get busted, I think, stick out. And I think their actions and just their body language, how they act, their attitude, I think you can tell more. I think you can read into that a lot. Not everybody can see it, but I think if you got a good read on people, you can tell who the ones are that are shady. So anyway, that's enough with my rant and ramble on this. I just wanted to bring you guys up to date on what was happening on this stuff. Most people are seeing it online. This is not getting as much attention now as it did when it first came out, but it will be interesting what happens on May 11th as far as what happens with their sentencing and everything. So stay tuned. We'll see what's happening. Until then, let's all go fishing, and I hope to catch you guys out on the water.